Hey guys, David here and welcome to another Dark Art Guitars video. Today we're talking about this Masso G3 Touch Controller here that is controlling my brand new Dark Art CNC. In this video I'll go over all of the different features of this controller, I'll go over how it integrates with my machine, and I'll mainly also focus on how the whole tool change logic works with this controller. And then in the end, I'll go over some pros and cons of this controller. Now, some of you might know that this is not the first time I'm having a look at the G3 Touch from Masso. When I built my Killer Bee, I eventually upgraded to this controller as well and made a review video about it. Forward a couple of months or maybe almost a year, and I'm planning the build of this new CNC machine, and well, I was very happy with my Masso controller. I had a couple of small issues in the beginning, but I quickly got used to them, and once I understood how the Masso wants to do things, it was very easy to use, and I never had any issues. Like, there were never any weird glitches or anything like that, which I had plenty of with my previous controller. So I was very happy to go with Masso again, and I wasn't going to go out and buy one, but I reached out to Masso and they offered to send over this G3 Touch for review, as well as their jaw pendant. And I can already tell you, actually using a nice jaw pendant instead of the China Special that I tried to use last time, all of the issues also all of a sudden gone. So any of my jawing issues I had with the previous controller were clearly the issue of the jaw pendant and not of the controller. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. The hardware that I have here is exactly the same as in the previous video, so you can feel free to go back to that video, and almost everything I said there is still relevant. Now, the software has been updated since. The previous video I think was in like September or October of 2023, so a bit over a year ago. And here I'm on version 5.07. That's a public release version, not the beta version. Now, shortly after I released my last video, they came out with the 5.1 beta, and it has a whole bunch of really cool features that kind of address a lot of my complaints. However, that beta has now been out for over a year, and also the 5.07 release, which came out in spring of this year, does not contain most of the kind of improvements of the 5.1 beta. So I'm still waiting on that, either of a new beta to come out or I guess the release 5.1 version, as there's some really cool stuff in there, but I kind of don't want to cover beta version, as this is not something I would recommend installing. They also don't recommend you install that on your production machine, just kind of if you want to play around with it. So I will be focusing on what is available now today in the 5.07 version. Now, the main improvements from the version I had to 5.06 and then 5.07 are, for one, a couple of bug fixes, actually a whole list of bug fixes of different logic issues. And it's just great to see. Some of those might have affected me, others I never even noticed, but that's good to know. And otherwise, the main new feature in the 5.07 version is that they now have a mobile app that allows you to kind of connect to it and see the machine status. To me, that is kind of cool, but for just one machine that is in the same room as me at all times, I kind of don't really get much use out of it. If you have a whole fleet and you can see which machine is busy, which one has an error, which one needs is done with machining, that could be really convenient. So for that, it's really good. But one feature that is linked to that is that the link that allows you to send files from your computer over Wi-Fi to the machine now works a lot faster. Now, it's still not very fast. A USB stick is still a lot faster in terms of file transfer speed, but it's not plenty fast enough that when if I drag and drop even a large file and upload it, if I come over here, move the machine to its starting position, touch some stuff off, by that time even the largest files I've used have transferred completely, and small files of course transfer basically instantly. So now, whereas before I always did the USB stick thing, I now use the Masso Link software to get all my files onto the machine, and that has been great. But that basically already is all the changes that at least affect me for my machine here. So instead of focusing too much on that more, I want to focus on how I implemented tool changer and also tool management and all of that, since that, of course, last time I did not touch at all because I did not have a tool changer on my Killer Bee, and I never made use of the tool library at all. So I'm going to focus much more on that later. But now I just want to, in case you didn't see the last video or just want a refresher, I just want to give an overview of the controller and how it integrates with my machine here. So what you get from Masso is just this black box here. It has a big touchscreen in the front. It's quite bright, it's very readable, and if you can mount it either in this vertical orientation or horizontal. If you mount it vertical, you get this touch keyboard on the bottom. Otherwise, if you mount it horizontally, you'll have to connect your own keyboard. There's a couple of USB ports on the inside. And then, well, you can control it by touch, or you could hook up a mouse. However, it's more designed for touch, so all of the kind of mouse gestures that you would expect to work don't necessarily work. So you don't get any more functionality with the mouse. It's just if you don't like touch, you can use a mouse. Other than that, you just have an e-stop and two buttons here. They're completely freely assignable, but kind of the logic one is to have cycle start here and feed hold. That's what I'm using here as well. And you have a USB port down here. That's where you connect your USB drive. All of the files that you are cutting are stored on there, and I think they're like kind of cached in the machine locally while you are cutting. So if there's an intermittent dropout of the USB, that's not an issue. But even if you upload something from your computer to the controller saves it on this USB drive. Then when you open it up here, it's just 4 screws that allow you to open it up. And then on the inside here, you can see the main controller itself. That's where all the logic is, and that's where you have all your connection points. And then you just have some space to hook everything up. Now this makes it a really convenient package to sell, and in some cases it's also convenient to integrate. However, for me, that is kind of inconvenient, because all of my other electronics are in this cabinet over here. All of my motor drivers and everything. So all of that needs to be connected with a bunch of cables to this head unit here. So there's a whole lot of cables going back and forth between these two, which is quite a bit of a pain, but that's just the way that this works. They do sell kind of an extension kit, like a breakout board, that allows you to have a breakout board inside of your electronics cabinet. I should have just asked them to send this. This would have made wiring a lot more easy, but this also works, of course. Now, what I've done here to mount it, you can mount it in all kinds of different ways onto your machine. I just got like a computer monitor arm that you can wall mount, and then I can adjust this freely wherever it is convenient for me. Now that meant that I had to have a bit more slack on the cables, but I didn't know exactly where I wanted it, and this is just really convenient. Now it is just at kind of the limit of what I want strength-wise. Since I'm constantly touching it, it needs to be fairly sturdy. So you want to make sure if you go this route to get a fairly heavy-duty wall mount, nothing too flimsy. Now the way I have the machine set up, I have a kind of x-axis is in this direction, I have y-axis here. Y-axis is two different motors. So this one here is connected as the y-axis, and the one over there is connected as the b-axis. Right now you can still only slave the a-axis to the x-axis and the b-axis to the y-axis. In the 5.1 beta you can freely assign that, so it's clearly possible, but it's just not available yet. But it's easy enough if you plan it out to connect it in that way. And then of course the z-axis and the a-axis for me is the dust shoe going up and down. Now this is not something that is natively integrated in Masso, and it does require some hacking to get that fully integrated. It's probably also not something that will be integrated anytime soon, just because it's kind of a niche. But I will make a separate video about building that out and how I'm gonna trick the controller into having that work completely. Then for homing, I have inductive limit switches on all of the axes, just on one side. So when the machine starts up, it asks me to home, and then it homes up everything in a nice order. And because I have two limit switches for the two motors for the y-axis, the gantry also automatically squares itself again. And basically, if I want to adjust the squareness of it, I can just move one of the limit switches back and forth, and that adjusts how the machine is squared itself. Then in terms of additional sensors, I have the little tool setter mounted down here. This is, well, basically essential if you have a tool changer, as this allows me to set the tool length. Now I have it set up to where I just touch off the tools when I install them, and then during the program it doesn't actually use the tool setter. For this reason I also have not added any air blast to blow off the tool setter, as I will only ever be using it when I'm physically there and using it, so I can make sure that there's no chips on there. Just made it a bit easier to hook everything up. I also have a probe, that's my tool number one, And I had this probe actually already in the Killer Bee, but I basically never used it because in the Killer Bee I'd have to manually change the probe into the tool, and then I could probe XY, but probing Z is basically useless because I would then take it out and install the tool, so I'd have to touch off the tool anyhow. Now with the tool setter I could have used Z as well, but still it was such a chore of swapping it in and out that I never used it. But here I use it all the time. It is a wire probe, it's fairly cheap, it was like $50 from AliExpress, but it works quite well. You can adjust its concentricity with set screws, so don't have to worry about run out, you can dial that in yourself, and it just does what it needs to do. Now if you have a like fancy metalworking CNC, it might not be accurate enough, but for woodworking it's plenty. And I just have this USB cable dangling here, and whenever I use it I swap it into the tool automatically and then plug in the cable, and that's what is connected to the Masso. Also don't worry, it is hooked up in a way where if I try to probe with it and it's not plugged in, it'll just instantly alarm out. The probing routines in Masso cover basically everything that I want to do. You can probe, of course, top surfaces, you can in any direction, you can probe corners, and you can also probe inside bores. That's what I mainly use when I flip something over. I have kind of like a locating bore, and then I probe that as my XY coordinate system, and then use one of the surfaces as my Z coordinate. And that is very easy to just kind of probe in here, and you can set up everything, and that is nice and convenient. Now the last devices that are connected to the Masso are the solenoids. One for the tool changer. I talked about it in my spindle review video. It basically has these 3 pneumatic inlets here, and it just one of them is getting kind of air by default, and then when I want to change the tool, that one is vented, and the other 2 get air. It's just done with a single 3-2 style solenoid. I have one of those for the tool changer, and then I have a second one that just controls the air blast, which is not hooked up yet. And those, since the Masso itself can only drive very small currents, you have a relay in here, and that relay kind of provides then the power, connects the solenoids to power, and works nicely. So now that we're in for a bit of a closer view, let's have a look at kind of the user interface. I've already talked a bit about it, but let's go through the top here, the different screens. First one is the F1 setup screen. That's where you can set up all your input and outputs. Let me quickly log in here. You can disable the user password. Otherwise, usually if you start it up, it always asks you for a password. You can disable that, but you cannot disable the password for the setup screen. So here on the very right, you have all of your different outputs that you can configure here. So I have, well, there's of course the spindle outputs, and otherwise I just have the coolant mist output, the chuck clamp output, which is for the ATC, and the other tool changer 1 output, which is actually to lower and raise your dust hood, and that is required in the tool changer logic. I'll go into that in a second, but I'm not actually using that. That is just fed back to one of the inputs. On the inputs, I have a whole bunch more. Here on the top are all of the ones from the MPG. Those are all automatically populated. And then I have 2 inputs from the tool changer. That's kind of the sensors from here, from the machine itself, whether the drawbar is drawn in and whether there's a tool present or not. Then I have the XYZ motor alarms. That is just kind of the alarm output from the motor driver. To get those running, I had to hook them up between ground and the input pin, and I had to also add a pull-up resistor manually here on the input, as the way that these inputs work, they don't provide a level signal, but just kind of pull it down to ground. So that was necessary. Then here I have my probe and tool setter inputs. As you can see right now, the probe is triggered as high. That is because it's not plugged in. That is just so, well, it doesn't probe something without the probe there. And the tool setter, if I press here, it's known. And then the way you have it set up is if the tool setter has 2 switches inside, if it gets pushed down too far, then it triggers the e-stop as well. And that just makes sure that, well, if something goes wrong and it just keeps traveling, the machine doesn't break itself. Then of course all of the homing sensors here as well. Then here on the left, you have all the menus for all the other functions, such as like setting up how you want to home, where your coordinates, how much you pull off of it. Then inside of your main spindle, that's also where I set the encoder. One of the inputs here was also for the spindle encoder, and here I said that it's 2 pulses per revolution. That's just the way that the Spinner-G spindle feedbacks the RPM. Now sadly, the RPM feedback here is not actually used for something. You still have to use the manual spin up and spin down delay for all of your logic. It would have been really cool if, well, since it knows the RPM, the spin down delay could be implemented in that it just waits until the RPM has reached 0. But that is not implemented, and I don't think it's a part of a beta either. There's also this function now that to auto stop or resume on feed hold the spindle. That just means that if you press feed hold, it also stops the spindle, and then if you press cycle start again, it will also restart the spindle, so you don't have to worry about that. I also have a brake on my spindle, so it spins down actually really quickly. It just takes like a second or less for it to stop and start, which is really convenient. If you have just a free running spindle, then, well, it'll take a couple of seconds and you have to set those delays quite long. And unfortunately, the spin down delay also is affecting your tool changer. The beginning of the tool change logic, it waits for the spin down delay because the tool change logic can be called from when the spindle is running, and it does not do a check whether it's running or not. It just always waits that. Now, luckily I have the brake resistor, so my spin down delay is only 1 second. However, if you have a free running spindle and you're doing ATC and your spin down delay is maybe 5 seconds, every time you do an ATC, even if it is not running, it'll wait for 5 seconds first before it starts doing the tool change, which will be kind of annoying, especially since that it will be very easy to implement in logic since it knows whether it's commanding the spindle to run or not, even if you don't have an RPM sensor. I'm not using the lubrication here, and then the tool changer, I'm going to go in to much more detail later. Then here for all of the different axes, it's all the same. You just set kind of how far your axis moves. For turning ones, you set the pulses per revolution. Now, the maximum pulses of the Masso are quite limited, and especially going with lead line servo motors, I had to reduce the pulses it expects per revolution by like a quarter. So it by default wants 10,000 pulses per revolution. However, my Masso controller here can only send at a maximum pulse rate of like 110 kilohertz. And that does not equal a very fast feed rate, like a very fast rapid rate. So I reduced that, and now my rapid rate is actually still limited by how fast the Masso works. So it's at 16,500 millimeters a minute. I might have said before that my rapids are 20,000. Apparently not limited here, but that's still plenty fast enough. You also set all of your accelerations and your kind of coordinate systems maximum and minimum in here. In the Auto Tool Zero, you set the XY coordinates in like machine coordinates of where your tool setter is, and also how fast it is and how far above it will start tool setting. Now, once the tool setter is enabled in here, you cannot manually change tool lengths anymore, which is kind of a bummer. I wish there was still the manual way, because my big face mill, for example, I cannot use the automatic tool setting function as in like in the center of it is deeper, so I have to manually jog it over to where one of the inserts is above the tool setter, and then just gonna jog down manually until the tool setter trips. However, to be able to actually set the tool length for that, I have to go in here, disable the auto tool setter, then I can manually input in the tool table the tool length, and then have to re-enable it again. Just one of those quirks. It's not a big deal. I don't have to set that tool length very often, but it's just minor annoyance. And then the remaining ones here I'm not using multi-head QR scanner and in user accounts you can just disable the passwords and such. Then in here the program and MDI, that's where you will run your programs, and here in MDI that's where you can manually run codes. Now to be able to manually do tool changes, you need to just type in tool number, so let's say tool 1, and then M6 is the command to do tool change. There's no like UI button to do this, but well, you really get used to typing that quite quickly. The rest in here, well, it's fairly standard. It's what you would expect. And then in jog and probing, a lot of these elements here stay. And actually, if you have, for example, the MDI window open and it opens in here, you can still use it while you are over here in the jog window. So that's actually quite cool. And they do stack on top of each other. So if I open the probe menu here as well, it's here. And then if I exit out again, the MDI window is still open in the back. Now, one thing here in kind of jog and probing and moving around, you have here the feed rate, which is kind of your rapids while you are just jogging around. However, there is no way to set the internal rapid speed of the machine without actually going like into the setup. So if you're setting up your tool changer and you want to do it a bit slower because you have 16,000 millimeters a minute rapids and you don't want to break stuff, then you have to manually, for all the axes, set the speed lower. You cannot just do a global override down to 10% when you're setting it up and then bump it back up. A lot of other machines might have like a knob for just rapid rate. This is not present here, and it doesn't sound like they're actively working on that either. Then let's quickly jump over the tools and offsets for now. Go over to conversational. Now this has also not changed since my last video. You can do very simple kind of conversational programs in here, and that just like, for example, when I was facing my spoil board, I just quickly did like a new wizard in here, and it's kind of clunky to use, especially you have to like give it a name for the wizard, and then you have to name the file, and then you have to name the export, but it is there, and if you don't use like Fusion and you kind of have a more manual approach to your code generation, you can use that. But I think it's more relevant, for example, if you use this as a lathe controller, there will be a lot more applications where you just want to quickly turn down a diameter, and you would use this instead of coding it up in Fusion. So in the USB menu, you just have your files listed here. Then when you select a file, you just select it. You can load it, and then it loads it into its local memory. You can also do some editing here and stuff like that. Now, last thing for the overview, up here you have a bunch of information actually. I kind of neglected that at first because it's kind of hidden. It just looks like it is just a display. But here you can see the probe status, for example. You can see your current work coordinate system. You also see the MPG settings. And this one here actually is a button. It's for the optional stop. So by clicking on it, you can turn it on and off here. That is certain M code inside of your G code, and if it option stop is on, the machine will stop when it reaches that code. So, for example, by default, it's added before every tool change. But then if you turn option stop off, it will just run through. And that way, when you're first running a program, you can have it on and check it every once in a while, and then turn it off afterwards for it to run automatically. You can also see I've already run 23 jobs, and up here is also where you access all of your Wi-Fi configuration settings. And with that completed, let's talk a bit more about the tool changer. So before we get into the tool changer logic, let's have a look here at the tools and offsets screen. In here is where you set up all of your different tools. So here, for example, my tool number 1 is my probe, and if I go into the configuration here, now in here you can give it a name, you can edit the Z offset, or you can click here for automatically setting it with your tool setter. Now here, since it's a probe, it's apparently letting me do something, but if I use one of the other ones, just have the auto tool 0 button here. Then you can also set your tool diameter, that is, and your tool wear. I'm not actually using work position inside of the controller, but if you're doing very precise work, you could have that enabled, and 6mm end mill, for example, is never actually 6mm. It's usually, it will be 5.9 something. And you can do that here with the tool diameter and tool wear, and then have the controller compensate for it. But for woodworking, well, I'm not working down to that decimal point anyhow. And then here is the tool in slot, is where you actually assign it to kind of a pocket on your tool changer. Just the tool number is always fixed. That is kind of set in Fusion, and one kind of tool in my drawer is one number, and that never changes. And then when I install it in here, tool slot number 7, I assign the tool here to the slot. Here is also the one kind of UI element that allows me to manually clamp and unclamp the tool that is in the spindle. So I first have to confirm here, safe to unclamp, then I click unclamp, and I hit clamp again. Now, I was at first a bit kind of sad that this is kind of so hidden, and there is a button for it to kind of for the chuck clamping in the kind of MDI screen. However, since it does not have the safe to unclamp kind of confirmation button, it only works to clamp it and not to unclamp it. Bit weird why this button is there if you can't actually use it. But in reality, you never really should be manually changing out tools from the spindle anyhow, because then the tool that the machine thinks it has versus the tool that is actually in there will be different, and when it goes to do a tool change, it'll try to put back a tool that is no longer in the spindle and you'll have a crash. So you always want to use the kind of logic to tool change with the automatic tool changer and not manually go changing stuff. Now, one minor annoyance here is just the way that you have to scroll. That is, with all the different things, you cannot do the regular touch scrolling like this. This does not work. You have to kind of hit the search bar here on the side. And because the tool table has 100 entries, going down to entry 10 is sometimes a bit annoying. It's very, very easy to overshoot. But you can see that I have a bunch of my tools in there, and I have just set up the ones so far that I've actually used. And the other ones are still empty, but in my Fusion library, I have probably about 30 tools that are named there. Then the work coordinate systems down here, I have also started using more. Now, your default one is just the G54. That is basically, you have the machine coordinates, which is just fixed by the machine, whereas like homing is in a specific spot, and the one spot on the table is always the same coordinate. Then, however, if you set your 0 to wherever you want to start machining, that is by default done in G54. Now, with the additional offsets here, you can have more than one 0. For example, you can have one thing run at G54, and then you have a second instance of the same part, and that be at G55. So you can set a second 0 point, and then the machine can offset automatically. So for example, I was cutting two fretboards that are exactly identical. So instead of Fusion, I have multiple offsets of this. One is at G54, one is at G55. So I just Fusion automatically output the code for both of these coordinates, and then I just set the 0 points for the two wherever I place those two fretboards for G54 and G55. And another use would be if I cut fretboards specifically, I cut out the pockets, and then while it is still on the table, I pour in the epoxy. And that has to cure for like a couple of days, ideally. So I will often put that on like a higher work coordinate system, so I can still continue using the machine on G54, and it saves the offset location of where I put that on the board. And since it has the homing, even if I turn that machine off and turn it back on, all of this stays the same. So it still knows where the fretboard is on the CNC, and then I can just go back to machining it finished without having to reprobe anything. Now you can go in here and manually edit these numbers. However, the more easy way is if you're in a job and probing in here, you have these buttons up here that allows you to switch between them, or you could just type that into MDI as well, and then you can do all of your probing and everything for whatever coordinate system you're in. You just need to pay attention which one you are in up here if you start using this. For example, if you're still in G55 from your last program and you think you're probing the 0 location for your new program, but that one is actually in G54, then you thought you just probed the 0, but once the program starts running, it's calling up G54 and the 0 is completely in a different place. Now, time to finally look at the tool changer menu in here. And if we open it up here, you get a list of different tool changer options, and these are just kind of different styles that they support. Of course, manual tool change, that's what you were using before, and there's two different types of linear tool changer, umbrella type tool changer, and high-speed rotary tool changer. For my machine, the type 2 linear tool changer has the best fitting logic. Now, the way you think of these is not necessarily whichever one you physically have, but just kind of they all have different logic of how the tools are changed, and then you just kind of pick the one that is the closest to you and try to make it work. Now, ideally, you would be able to change the tool changer logic yourself. Now, it makes sense that they have a couple of presets, and they are actually working on that. They offer me access to an early closed alpha version where you can change the tool changer logic yourself. However, like I don't want to be running alpha software on my production machine here, so that's not that applicable. And if you have a different tool changer logic that is not covered by one of these, you can submit a request to them to implement it, and they will probably at some point implement your logic and then have that available for you, but you cannot manually do that. I'll talk a bit more about this limitation in the end in my conclusion about the pros and cons of this controller. But for me, the linear tool changer type 2, apart from the dust hood that it expects, works perfectly. So I'm gonna go into this config. That's another kind of minor annoyance, is that to open it here, no, enter does not work. Like, it's selected here, but to edit it, I have to double tap on it, which can be kind of hard since these items are close together. Like, this list could easily be spread out, and opening it up with enter doesn't work. Might also help if I'm not at a weird angle. Here we go. That was just a camera effect. It was never that painful as it just was here on camera. Now in here, in the configuration, you just get all the kind of numbers that you input, but you will have to look at the documentation to be able to know what you need to put in here and how the logic actually works. Now in linear tool changer type 2, which is what I'm using here, the way it works is that when it gets the tool change command, first it moves the spindle all the way up. That makes sense. That way it doesn't collide with anything. Then it gives the command to move the dust hood up, which in their implementation is just a single output pin. Now, if you have your dust hood controlled by kind of pneumatics, which I guess is what most ATC machines with a dust shoe would have, then that makes perfect sense. And then after that output is activated, it waits for the sensor that says that the dust shoe is up to be read that it is up. Now, that is a bit of an issue if you don't actually have a dust shoe that is pneumatically put up and down, because it expects a input to go high, which you might not have. So the way I am at the moment circumventing that is I just have the dust hood output connected to an input directly just with a jumper wire. So whenever it goes high for it to move up, it instantly, reads that it is up, and then if it tells it to go down, it instantly reads that it is down. That's just kind of a hacky way to circumvent that part of the logic. Then it will move to the tool clearance position, and you have here all of the positions for your tools. That's like the XY coordinates of where your tools are, or like where the tool pockets are. And then you have a clearance offset is just kind of in addition to that coordinate. So if your tool is here, your offset might be here, so it moves to here. Then you can also have, that's kind of where it rapids to, and then you can have a feed to a different offset, and then from there, in this logic, it moves back or back and over, depending on if you have XY stuff here. Then it releases the chuck, so the tool is now free. It will release that. It waits until the sensor from the ATC says that the tool is no longer clamped. Then after that, it moves up. Alright, looks like I've been rambling for so long that my camera battery died and I didn't even notice. So I think I was just explaining about the logic of how it kind of moves it. And last we had put away the old tool, and then it moves up, it moves over and down again to the new tool. Now the heights of where it moves over and kind of where the tool height is, where it stops, are the these ones here. You have the clearance height and you have the Z position height. And then when it arrives at the new one, it clamps again, make sure that the tool is actually clamped. And if in any of those cases where it has like want to check, like where it checks if the tool is clamped and it does not get a response that it is clamped within a couple of seconds, then it'll just throw an error and you can intervene. Then after that, it grabs it again, moves out, and it actually does also tell the dust shoe to come down again, and it waits for that signal to go down again. That's why I cannot just use, for example, the limit switch for my kind of CNC dust shoe to make sure that it is actually up, because in the end it does not complete unless it moves down again, which I cannot implement in that logic. Just a small quirk that would be nice if you could change it, but you can't in this current iteration. Alright, so now that you have a bit of an overview about this controller, you can see what it can do, and what you can see here is what it can do and nothing more. Now, that is both its greatest strength and its greatest weakness in one point. And I guess it just comes down to what you are looking for. Now, if you want to be able to change everything, change what each button does, change how exactly the logic works for everything, that this controller is not for you. You don't even have to watch this video, which I guess it's too late for now. But if you want to do all of that, then something like Linux CNC would be great for you. Or even in Mac, you can go change everything at a very low level. However, that requires a lot of knowledge of how it works, a lot of time looking into it, making sure everything works right, and then verifying it that it doesn't create any other issues. If, however, you like are building a fairly standard machine without any weird, quirky things, or you're willing to work around it a little bit, then this controller can be great, because it is very easy to use. You don't have to go through many configurations. You see, the setup screen is just one screen with a small handful of submenus. Everything is kind of easy to set up. There's not a whole lot of weird things that you don't know about, and it's all cohesive in one unit. It also has good documentation that kind of guides you through all of the different options there are, because the options are limited. They can actually have an article on every single option. So from that point of view, from kind of easy to use and just having a nice unit that just works, from that point of view, it's amazing. And the price is another argument that you might have for or against it. It also depends on which direction you're coming from. If you're coming from more industrial controllers, then the Masso is really cheap. If you're coming from a kind of hacked together Mach 3 setup, then it's very expensive. It's around $1,000 for the controller. However, you do get a nice touchscreen, you get the controller, you get the software. All of those things added up will get you pretty close to that price point already. And well, in the end, it's up to you to decide whether this is worth it or not for you. But I really like my Masso controller. It has its faults, but you learn to work around them, and it is always like very predictable. I know by now basically every option it has and how it does everything, and so when I change something, I know exactly how it's going to behave, exactly what it's going to do, what its logic is, and there is not some hidden sub-layer behind somewhere that does something else that I didn't know about. They are also continuously working on software updates, software upgrades that are increasing the functionality. However, well, I guess they don't have a very large team, and the updates are very slow. The last beta has been out for over a year and still not integrated into any main revision. So I wouldn't expect a ton of features to come out, but based on kind of the recent blogs, there might be a new version coming out sometime soon that hopefully integrates some of the features from the beta. They're not really groundbreaking features, just kind of more convenience little things that have annoyed me before. So with that said, if you have any more questions, do leave a comment down below. I will be making the kind of final video about everything here, and there will be a Q&A section in there as well. So leave the comments down below. And with that, thank you guys for watching. Thanks again to Masso for sending over this controller. It really helps out a lot. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.